I had to put aside my dreams and my goals, working to become a jet pilot. In fact, I wanted to be an astronaut. But to do that, I would have had to go to Vietnam and bomb the Vietnamese people. And I realized I couldn't do that and live with myself.
When I first went to a protest in New York, I met soldiers from other military bases. And I began to realize that this was not just something happening for our group at Fort Hamilton in New York, but was happening all across the Army. When you begin to see that there are many others doing the same, you begin to feel stronger.
These were not personal protests, but a wave of soldiers fighting for peace that was an organized and widespread movement. Hundreds of underground newspapers were written and published by the soldiers themselves, supported by a network of anti-war coffeehouses in nearly every major city. This movement was heavily supported by civilians, including Ron Carver and his friends, of course.
So tell us more about the anti-war coffee shops located right next to the Army base.
There were dozens of these coffee houses that we set up outside of the military installations. There was an Army base very close to school, 2-hour drive, and I began to work with folks who set up a coffee house just a stone's throw from the main gates. It was one of the largest bases in the country, called Fort Dix. We rented a former fast food restaurant and turned it into a coffee house where soldiers who were against the war or skeptical about the war could come talk to each other, where soldiers back from Vietnam could talk to soldiers who had yet to deploy to Vietnam. We helped them produce underground newspaper. We called it underground newspaper, which they would then get printed. We would help them bring it to a printer, bring back 4,000 or 5,000 copies, and they would smuggle them onto the base.
Did you face any challenges, opening the coffee house like that, and how does the people react to?
The very first one was opened in Columbia, South Carolina, outside of Fort Jackson. And the police harassed it, the military intelligence harassed it, and finally it was shut down. And that was true across the country. The one I worked at first, outside of Fort Dix, at one point people threw a smoked grenade, and then later they threw a bomb. Luckily no one was in it, and they burned it down.
Wow. So those GI